I used to believe that graduation day would finally be the great equalizer. I had this naive childish hope that when Callie and I stood on that same wooden stage, draped in the same heavy crimson gowns, the invisible hierarchy of our childhood would finally dissolve. We heard the same applause, walked under the same Oregon sun, and shared the same last name. But as the commencement music began to swell, the reality was as cold as the rain that often soaked the moss in our backyard. Only one of us had walked this 4-year journey without drowning in a sea of past due bills, back-breaking night shifts, and the suffocating silence of being the strong one. My parents, Susan and David, had paid for every single credit hour of Callie's tuition. They had funded her weekend trips, her designer graduation dress, and the sparkling SUV that sat in the parking lot. All I ever received was the same tired sentence they had used like a shield for 22 years. You were always the strong one, Giana. To the world it sounded like a compliment. To me it was the sound of a door being locked from the outside. My name is Giana Harper, and for as long as I can remember, my parents have mistaken my quietness for strength and my self-sufficiency for a lack of need. I grew up in a small house in Oregon where the walls seemed to hold more expectations than affection. Love, at least the version handed to my sister Callie, felt effortless, abundant, and almost blinding. Callie was the sparkly one. The golden daughter my parents were proud to display at every neighborhood barbecue. I was the other half, the one who learned early how to blend into door frames and fold my disappointments into tiny, silent squares. Some of my earliest memories carry a strange, metallic heaviness. I remember a Christmas when I was 7. Callie unwrapped a dollhouse that was taller than her, with tiny electric lights that flickered like real windows. I watched her face light up as Susan and David cheered. Then it was my turn. I opened a thin, spiral-bound notebook and a single blue pen. "You're the writing type, sweetie," Susan had said, her eyes already drifting back to Callie's new toy. "You have such a rich inner world. You don't need all the bells and whistles." I pretended to love it. I hugged that notebook to my chest that night, not because it was a treasure, but because there was nothing else in that house for me to hold on to. I learned then that my strength was just a convenient excuse for my parents to save money and emotional energy. Then there was the time Callie scraped her knee on the backyard slide. It was a tiny scratch, barely enough to require a bandage. But Susan rushed out of the house screaming Callie's name as if the world were ending. For a week, the neighbors heard the saga of Callie's brave fall. Contrast that with the day I fell from the old apple tree. I hit the ground so hard the world turned gray and my vision blurred into a kaleidoscope of static. I lay there for a long time waiting for someone to notice. David only glanced out the kitchen window, saw me sitting up and turned back to his coffee. "Giana's tough," I heard him tell my mother. "She'll handle it. She doesn't need us hovering over her like she's made of glass." That sentence became the script of my life. Giana's tough. Giana will manage. Giana doesn't need what other people need. It was their justification for looking past me. The only person who didn't treat me like I was carved from granite was my grandmother, Margaret. She lived in Montana and only visited a few times a year, but every visit felt like a warm patch of sunlight in a cold house. Once, when Callie was showing off a new crystal bracelet Susan had bought her just because, Grandma Margaret slipped a small wooden hair clip into my hand. My name was carved on the back in her elegant, shaky script. "It's not expensive, Giana," she whispered, her eyes fierce and kind. "But it's one of a kind. Just like you. Don't let them make you feel like you're part of the furniture." I wore that clip whenever I felt invisible. It was my secret reminder that someone somewhere truly saw me. By the time we reached college, the divide had become a canyon. Callie's full tuition was paid before the first leaf hit the ground. She had a new laptop, a monthly allowance for socializing, and an apartment she never had to clean. I moved into a damp, cramped basement dorm at the state university. I didn't have a safety net. I had 3 jobs. I stacked them like bricks just to stay above water. I woke before sunrise to mop the cold linoleum floors of the science building. My afternoons were spent tutoring high school students in calculus, and my nights were swallowed by late shifts in the campus library. Every time I called home, exhausted and smelling of industrial cleaner, Susan would offer that same hollow praise. "You were always the strong one, Giana. You'll be fine. You've always been so resourceful." Strength meant my exhaustion was invisible. It meant my hunger was resilience. I remember an afternoon during my junior year. I had just finished a grueling shift, my hair frizzy from the humidity and my collar damp with sweat. I spotted David's car outside the student center. My heart leaped. Maybe they're here to surprise me, I thought. Maybe they finally want to know how I'm doing. But when I got closer, Callie was already in their arms. They were handing her a designer leather purse they'd bought her because she had seemed stressed about finals. David waved half-heartedly at me, and Susan didn't even move to hug me. "Oh, sweetie, didn't see you there," Susan said, her eyes scanning Callie's new bag. "You look tired. Listen, Callie is struggling with her course load. Since you're so good at the hard stuff, could you sit down and give her some advice? Help her organize her life." "Advice," I whispered, as if my only value was what I could do for their golden daughter. I watched them drive away to a celebration dinner I wasn't invited to. I went back to my basement room and ate a bowl of instant noodles. Small cuts over and over. None deep enough to kill me, but all of them enough to make breathing sting. By senior year, a quiet truth began to settle in my chest. If they hadn't seen me by now, they never truly would. I stopped telling them about my life. I didn't tell them when I was selected for the advanced accounting seminar, or when my professor told me my work was the best he'd seen in his career. I celebrated my wins alone with a cheap muffin and a quiet walk by the river. Callie talked about nothing but her graduation photo shoot. Susan already had her dress picked out. David joked about how he was going to cry when his girl crossed the stage. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was just the strong one who would figure out her own way to the stadium. The week before graduation was hollow. While Callie was at the spa, I was picking up extra shifts to pay off the last of my lab fees. One night, a text from Susan blinked on my screen. "Hey sweetie, we're taking Callie for a big graduation brunch afterward. You should come if you're free." If I'm free. At my own graduation. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out Grandma Margaret's wooden hair clip. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see the forgotten daughter anymore. I saw a woman who had survived a family that had tried to turn her into a ghost. I had received an email that morning. I was being awarded the Departmental Excellence Award, a prestigious honor that came with a $100,000 career path scholarship and a job offer from a top-tier firm in New York. I hadn't told Susan or David. I didn't want their indifference to touch it. Commencement morning arrived with a mocking brilliant sunlight. The campus was a swarm of families and laughter. I walked alone toward the stadium. My gown was secondhand and a little frayed at the hem, but it felt honest. I found my seat in the rows of black gowns. My parents and Callie arrived late, waving at me from the VIP section. Callie looked perfect. Her hair done in loose waves, her makeup flawless. "There she is," David shouted, pointing at Callie. "Our graduate." The ceremony began. The dean spoke about unwavering parental support. I felt a bitter smile tug at my lips. Support was a selective privilege in the Harper household. When Callie's name was called, Susan let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her hands to her chest. David stood up to take 50 pictures. Callie walked with the confidence of someone who had never had to worry about a bill. She blew a kiss to them and sat down glowing. "That's our girl," Susan whispered loudly. The ceremony continued until the announcer reached the special recognitions. My heart started a slow, heavy rhythm. "Before we conclude," the dean said, "we would like to honor a student whose academic performance and service to the department have set a record. This year's recipient of the Award for Excellence in Accounting, including the $100,000 Vanguard Scholarship, is Giana Harper." The silence behind me was more powerful than the applause from the crowd. I stood up. I didn't look at the stage. I turned my head just enough to see them. My parents were frozen. Susan's hands were hovered in mid-air. David's camera was lowered, forgotten. Callie's smile had slipped, replaced by a look of bewildered, sharp confusion. Their faces drained of color. They looked exactly like I knew they would. Like people who had just realized they'd been standing in a gold mine while staring at a pebble. I walked toward the stage. Every step felt like I was shedding a layer of the strong one skin they had forced me to wear. When the dean shook my hand and handed me the certificate, I looked directly at Susan and David. For the first time in my life, they looked small. After the ceremony, the air was thick with tension. While other families were laughing, my family approached me like I was a stranger. "Giana," Susan said, her voice brittle. Why didn't you tell us? $100,000? Excellence award? We had no idea. You never asked, I said. It was the simplest, most brutal truth I'd ever spoken. We just didn't realize. David cleared his throat, unable to meet my eyes. You always seemed so fine. You never complained. We thought you had it all under control. I had to have it under control, I said quietly, because you only check on the ones you think are fragile. You used my strength as a reason to ignore me. You paid for Callie's life while I worked 80-hour weeks. And now you're upset because you don't get to take credit for the result. Susan flinched. Giana, honey, we're proud of you. We're your parents. Pride isn't something you get to announce when it's convenient, Susan, I said. There was no anger left, just a vast cold distance. You weren't there for the struggle. You don't get to be there for the reward. Callie looked at me, her eyes glistening. She looked like she had just realized the world wasn't actually built for her. Giana, I didn't know. I really didn't see it. I know you didn't, Callie, I said. When you're the sun, you never notice the shadows. But I'm done living in yours. Before they could respond, a woman in a sharp, gray suit approached us. It was Lucinda, a senior partner from the firm in New York. She ignored my parents entirely, extending her hand to me. Giana Harper, we've finalized your relocation package. Your flight to New York is booked for Monday. Are you ready? I've been ready for years, I said. As Lucinda walked away, David tried one last time. New York? That's a big move, Giana. Maybe we can help you get settled? We could drive the SUV out there. I looked at him. I've been figuring things out on my own since I was 10, David. I think I've got it from here. I didn't stay for the brunch. I walked away from that stadium, the sunlight hitting the wooden hair clip. I didn't have to turn back to know they were still standing there, confronted by the reality they had shaped. I spent my final 2 days packing my life into a single suitcase. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I landed in New York a week later. The city was loud and indifferent to my past, and that anonymity felt like freedom. I walked through the glass lobby of my new firm, knowing every step forward was mine alone. Being the strong one was never a compliment from my parents. It was the excuse they used to leave me behind. But now that strength was my power. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was my foundation. I looked out my office window at the skyline. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the architect of my own life. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like neglect. Felt like peace. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like it tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.